Our Inspirational Indie Authors podcast stream is proudly sponsored by Book Vault. Sell high-quality print-on-demand books directly to readers worldwide and earn maximum royalties selling directly. Automate fulfillment and create stunning special editions with Book Vault Bespoke. Visit bookvault.app today for an instant quote. I'm Howard Lovey of the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com, and you're listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. Every episode, I interview an ally member to find out what inspires them and how they are an inspiration to other authors. My guest this episode is Joshua S. Narins, a literary fiction author based in New England. Before turning to writing, he spent 2 decades as a cinematographer, specializing in aerial, underwater, and second unit film work. Now he brings that visual storytelling sensibility to his fiction, crafting character-driven narratives with a sharp cinematic edge. I'll let Joshua S. Narins tell his story.
Hello, my name is Joshua S. Narins. I'm a literary fiction author based in New England. And prior to embarking on a writing career, I spent 20 years in the movie business as a cinematographer, specializing in aerial, underwater, and second unit cinematography.
So it sounds like you had a life of adventure even before you were an author. So we'll go into that. But first, talk a little bit about your early life. Where did you grow up, and was reading and writing always a part of your life?
I am a native New Englander, raised here outside of Boston, and reading was always a big part of not just my life, but the family life. We were very fortunate that we had a really nice library here in our little tiny town, and there's nothing in the town but a post office and a library, pretty much. And my brother, my younger brother, and my late sister, all of us dove into the library. Both my mother and my father imbued a love of books and reading into us. My father telling us stories, my mom taking us to the library, reading stories to us, and we all started reading very early. And we devoured the whole library. And when we ran out of the kids section, we moved on to the adult section. But reading was always a big part of it. And then when we went on to school, the schools that we attended twice a year would actually have book fairs. And they really encouraged reading. And we were reading pretty advanced stuff very young, but this was a while ago. Education was a lot more stringent, a lot more disciplined, and there weren't all the options to distract you. The internet, a million channels, streaming, all of that. So books were really your only window to the outside world and your only window to the things that you might want to pursue. My younger brother, who is a doctor, he loved science fiction. He loved anything. He was 6, 7, 8 reading Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov and all that kind of stuff. For my sister, it was English stories, Jane Austen and all that stuff. For me, it was a little more literary derived, A Catcher in the Rye, and all of that started me down the path. We all liked different things. We all read different things, but we were all avid readers.
Probably sparked your interest in storytelling since you eventually went on to become a cinematographer, which is a kind of storyteller. Could you trace that to your love of books as a child?
I can, to the degree that I love stories and I love the telling of stories. I got involved with photography very early. I was probably 8 or 9 when I started doing lab work and darkroom work, and from there got involved in theater and had taken a filmmaking course. A high school I had attended had a filmmaking program. And so telling the stories was always important to me, and I must confess that being a writer, was a lot like being a chef to me. I loved going to restaurants. It never dawned on me that I could be the guy making the food. And that's the way I looked at books. I knew I was heading towards filmmaking. It had been my goal for a very long time as a kid. And I think what really changed for me as a writer was writing was always in the background, and I was writing, and I wrote a terrible play in high school. But writing was always a venue to getting behind the camera, to getting my eye to the eyepiece, to the larger screen. And when I decided that the screen was no longer the final destination, that the book itself would be the final destination, that changed my writing quite a bit. Because when you write a screenplay or a play or a teleplay or any of that stuff, you're mapping out a blueprint. You're giving a blueprint that's going to go to other people to build a building. Now, I confess that when I wrote screenplays or teleplays, I had every intention of making those projects. And unfortunately, I didn't have the background on the producing side to make those things happen. But 90% of screenplays, I'm going to guess, are unproduced. So the work never gets realized. Whereas when you write a novel, the work is fully realized. You have finished it. It exists. It is there.
Right.
So that was a big mind shift, not just in the way to tell the story, but the satisfaction that the project was actually
You have
completed,
a
as
finished
opposed to
project. Yeah.
being, yeah, a roll of blueprints that sits on a shelf somewhere that never sees the light of day.
We'll get to your transition to writing, but let's go back to cinematography a little bit. What kind of led you to pursue that kind of career, and how did you break into it?
It was, again, you got to go back a little bit. I was a kid in the 70s and movies were larger than life. The screen was larger than life. And the movies that affected me, that spoke to me, weren't necessarily the movies that were going. When all of my friends were going crazy about Star Wars, my dad made a mistake and took me to a movie that he thought was just another Clint Eastwood movie. It was Apocalypse Now. And the movie blew my
Mm-hmm.
mind. And that's what I wanted to do. I realized that the way the movie could make me feel, the way the movie could transport me, that just spoke to a larger canvas of storytelling. And also back then it was a collective experience. You had all sorts of people in the audience enjoying, experiencing the highs and lows of the movie together. I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of my generation all remember seeing Star Wars for the first time. I don't think I've ever seen an audience interact or be moved by a movie the way they were with the first Rocky film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a little hard to explain. Back then, the country wasn't in the best shape. My mom was getting up at 5 in the morning to go get 2 gallons of gas at the gas station. And that story just resonated for everybody in the country. And the audience just came out of that theater dancing on air. And at the time, there was a theater, it's no longer there, in Framingham that had 6 screens, and all 6 screens were Rocky. And when it emptied out, people were humming the music. They felt fantastic. And I never saw an audience interact with any film and carry that out the way I saw with Rocky.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just fortunate that a high school that I attended for a couple of years had a filmmaking program, and we made a terrible video film, but it sank the hook in me. I loved the craft, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
loved the audience reaction, which is something you don't really get with writing. You never get to see the audience enjoy your book or react to your book. But in filmmaking back then, again, people weren't in their houses, they weren't streaming. It was this collective experience.
I'm 59 years old and probably the same general generation as you. And I remember those times. And as a kid, even Star Wars, just leaving with this feeling in your stomach that you just don't get anymore after watching something streaming.
No, I can say that I don't think you're going to get the most out of Lawrence of Arabia on your Apple Watch.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Now, you didn't just specialize in film. You worked on what sounds to me on paper anyway, to be rather dangerous work environments, aerial, underwater. What drew you to those areas?
It wasn't so much I was being drawn to those areas. I went from Boston to NYU Film School. And when I came out of NYU Film School, I had decided that I wanted to be a director of photography. I had a couple of projects in my mind that maybe someday I would direct, but really camera work and lighting, that was really my bailiwick. And I had stacked up all of my classes into 3 days, and I was working the other two. And so I came out working as a camera assistant, focus puller, and I really wanted to move up. And everybody said, that's funny, kid, come back when you're 40. And the one elegant thing about the film business is that every bit of absolutely useless, unapplicable knowledge that you have is what's going to set you apart. For instance, I knew people that made huge livings shooting food. They were food nuts, and they made a fortune shooting food for commercials or shooting cars for commercials. I had a diving background prior to going to college, and I was fortunate to hook up with a couple of the best in the country at the time who trained me in underwater. And then from there, I went to aircraft. And so those became my specialties, and those became my way into being a full-fledged cameraman. So I always thought that I would eventually go back to doing the entire movie. But unfortunately, I had a series of health issues that made it so that that wasn't possible.
Yeah, well, did health issues, did that contribute to your decision to shift your focus to writing?
It did. It did. I still had stories I wanted to tell, and I still started out writing saying, I'll write the book, and from the book, then maybe I can make the film. At a certain point, to be honest, that idea went away. I've watched what's happened in the film industry. I've watched the kinds of projects they're producing. I've watched the whole industry is unrecognizable to me from what I was involved in. And to be honest, I was based in New York, not California. So I would say that 70% of my career was high-end commercials and the rest was movies. At that time in Los Angeles, most of it was series television and then high-end movies. But whether it's the commercials today or the films today or the way the industry works or the way the decisions are being made, it just bears no resemblance to the industry that I had hoped to be in and
Hmm.
was in briefly. It's a different world now, and their aesthetic and their market is a different world. So I just said, you know what, I am going to just write the best books that I can write and try to craft that experience in the book.
Yeah. So, yeah, you decided to get rich quick by writing books, right?
It's not so much a get rich quick thing. It's having a completed idea that's yours, that's your fingerprint, that's your voice, that you're telling the story you want to tell and you're telling it in the way you want to tell it. And filmmaking is a very collaborative medium. And if the production assistant doesn't make the coffee right, everybody's in a bad mood. If there's all sorts of things that affect how things turn
Hmm.
out. And in books, it's a one-man show. And that the whole concept of the auteur, I think, is a dead issue. No matter how big the name is in film, you're just not accounting for the way things work today. Nobody can do what David Lean did. Nobody can do what Akira Kurosawa did. It just the economics, the business, the way things work, it's just not that way anymore. But as an independent author, you can do that and you can take the risk and say, I'm going to come what may, I'm going to put out what I think is the best product and that is the way I want it to be, and hopefully it'll fly. And if it doesn't fly, I've still won because it exists.
Right. It's out in the world. So, yeah, so tell me about your first novel, False Neutral, and the setting and how you came to write it.
The first novel takes place primarily in the Back Bay in the North End of Boston. It takes a little bit off the coast of Maine and a smidgen in New York. It's really a character-driven drama, and I'm just going to go back to the movies for a second. The kind of movies that I wanted to do, the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell. There was an old joke in the film business that if you want to make movies, you go to Los Angeles, and if you want to make films, you stay in New York. And I don't write the $100 million movies. I write the $20 million movies, the kinds of movies that they made in the 70s into the 80s, a smidgen in the 90s, but character-driven stories where the arc of the character, the arc of the story is what is paramount, not the high concept effects-driven things.
Hmm.
So False Neutral was really a character-driven drama. The way I describe it is it's a simple story of choices made and not made and their collision.
Did you still think visually when you wrote the book, or did you use a
I do.
different muscle?
I can't help that when I write the book, I see it still as a cinematographer. I still almost can pick the lenses and pick the lighting. It's a reflex. And the one thing I would say to people out there, just like I'd said earlier about film, that every bit of useless knowledge that you have is what will set you apart. I think that's true in writing as well. I think you have to bring those things that nobody else knows, that is nobody else's perspective, to make something unique and wholly your own. And I think my books have a cinematic quality to them. That's something I've heard from people before, but you can't help it. You can't help your background, your aesthetic, and mine was definitely shaped by filmmaking.
No, that's good advice. Use what's uniquely yours. And whether it's a unique point of view, any unique experiences you've had, something that distinguishes you, even if it's something minor. Yeah. So now I need to figure out how to incorporate my background in writing about nanotechnology 20 years ago.
You might not have to incorporate the nanotechnology, but the mindset of an engineer or the mindset of a designer or the mindset of somebody who's an architect, that's what you're going to bring to it.
Hmm.
So you're going to piece a story together differently than I will as a filmmaker, who is going to piece a story together differently because of my background, because of the way I approach it. And to be honest, I go one step further in that every book I write is completely different. I'm always starting from square zero. I'm always starting from a blank page, and I'm always trying to find that story's voice, that story's tonality, that story's vocabulary. I suppose one of the best compliments I was given was I've written two novels so far, and somebody said if I picked them both up, I think two different people wrote them. And to me, that was fantastic because I'm trying to serve the story. I'm trying to serve the characters. I'm not trying to put so I spend a good amount of time trying to find the way that story wants to be told and then bringing that through the story, which is different. I'm sure a lot of your listeners at Ally are genre writers. And so they have a different problem of how do I take a set of characters through a 5 or 6 book series? How do I keep it interesting? How do I keep finding the plot twists? But the characters exist in a sense, whereas as literary fiction, you're always starting from square zero.
Your second novel, Clear Cuts, so was that written with a different kind of voice?
Yeah, it was a very different voice. Clear Cuts takes place in a remote town, a fictional town in Maine near the Canadian border. The way I describe that one is it's a raw, visceral tale about the ties that bind coming unbound. And whereas the first book, False Neutral, is very elegant, internal, the second book is very raw and very external, has a smidgen of violence in it. It's a rougher place, but it has a New England sparseness to it, a sort of a Maine sensibility, and Western Maine, not coastal Maine. So it's in rough lumber country.
Hmm. Is that something you have personal experience with?
I do. I was never a lumberjack,
Hmm.
but I grew up. My father was a big outdoorsman and he dragged me all over some very rough parts of Maine. And I met a lot of characters up there. Now, the book is not about them, but those experiences shaped the background to it and shaped the ambiance, if you go. It's really about a family in its last days and how the family disintegrates. But I did spend a lot of time all over Western Maine with my dad as a kid back in the 70s. And the book takes place in the early 90s.
Interesting.
So it's a throwback to then.
So there are lots of streaming series about families disintegrating these days. I'm thinking about, I don't know, Succession, Yellowstone, that kind of thing. So maybe there's a future for you in filmmaking again after all.
You never know. The second book somebody did, it was very vague. I'm not going to say it was an offer or anything, but they did put some feelers out about a possible option. But again, if this was to become a film, I would want to direct it. I would want to carry through the project.
Right.
I'm not looking to sell it, so that changes it because the nature of the way projects get developed today, and especially with all sorts of arcane. Now, I was never a member of the Writers Guild, so I can't speak literally, but there's all sorts of rules why when you start hiring writers and things change. And my books and the stories are very tight. They're very balanced. It's almost like a helicopter for if you move one control, you're going to affect everything. And I really would want to see it through to completion.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's possible in today's world because things have changed.
Yeah.
But again, they both have definite cinematic feelings to them.
And also, like most indie authors, you like that control. Had you ever considered going the traditional route, or has it always just been indie the whole way?
You know what? It was one of those things. I'm sure it's the same for a lot of indie authors out there. I wanted to go indie. Everybody said, no, you got to try for traditional. But again, coming back to you know what you know, I really feel that publishing is where filmmaking was in 1990. Now, when I came out of college, it was the dawn of the independent film world. And a lot of people made films that would never have had the opportunity had they tried to go for a deal with Paramount or Universal or whoever. It just wasn't there. And it afforded a lot of opportunity to a lot of people. Now, were some bad movies made? Absolutely. But that's not really the point. The point is a lot of people you'd never hear of them. You'd never see their careers. And I think that's where publishing is. And I think that indie publishing allows for more people to publish, but also to bring their voice through it. You're not going through the gauntlet of the traditional publishing process. You're getting to do it. You're getting to put your stamp on it. And I think that's really important. And I think it's going to produce a lot of authors who will have really good careers. I think of Hugh Howey and he's not a literary fiction, he's science fiction. What he was able to do as an independent and then come back around and negotiate his deals and then come back around and negotiate for his TV series on
Yeah.
Apple. All that came out of being an indie and retaining all his rights and retaining all his creative control and deciding for himself, which that just isn't possible when you're going the trad route. And to be honest, even the literary fiction people who are traditionally published, I don't see huge marketing pushes anymore. I don't see
Yeah.
enough to make giving up all that control worth it to me.
Right.
Now somebody else might look at it completely differently and they really want to be with those big five, but to me, I relish the creative control. Again, it's my reaction to having been in such a collaborative field for so long.
Yeah.
I like being able to make the decisions.
In regards to marketing, yeah, the first question any traditional publisher will ask you is what kind of audience do you already have? Not what kind of audience are we going to help you build, but what do you bring to the table? And if you already have that audience, why do you need the publisher? So I guess my next question for you is how have you built your audience?
One reader at a time. I think, again, for the what I'm going to call the genre writers. If you're a romance writer, if you're a science fiction writer, or mysteries or thrillers, doesn't really matter. There are places where those people gather. The question is, will they give your book a chance? They want the next thriller. They want the next science fiction book. Is yours going to be it? That really doesn't exist in literary fiction. You're really trying to meet readers and hopefully the story sparks something with them or the description sparks something with them and they're willing to give you a chance. But it's the way I liken it is the genre readers are lucky in that they're like trawling for fish. They know where the fish live and they're hoping they can catch a few. And the literary fiction author is more like a fly fisherman. You're trying to present that fly every single solitary time to an individual bass or trout or salmon, and it takes a while. It takes a while. Reviews certainly help. The awards certainly help, but it's still an uphill battle because it's as hard to find where they are as it is to make the pitch.
Speaking of awards, yours have won several awards by several organizations. Has this impacted sales or your career or self-confidence or all of the above?
It's definitely good for self-confidence. It's always nice that if you write something that it lands. But I'll tell you a story, and this probably meant more to me than anything. There was a young girl who was working behind the desk at a doctor's office that I went to, and she heard that I had a book coming out. And I told her what the book was, and I didn't think twice about it. My first book, False Neutral. And the next time I came in, it had gone live, and she held up her phone and showed me that she had purchased a Kindle. I said, that's fantastic. I really appreciate the support. Was back about 6 months later. All of a sudden, she comes out from behind the desk, comes running up to me, hugs me, says, "Thank you so much for writing the book. Where can I get the paperback?" And I said, "That's really kind." I said, "You got the Kindle?" She's like, "No, I want the paperback too. Where do I get that?" Now, you can't do better than that.
Yeah, yeah.
I get that it's one sale. I get that it's one book. I get that but to me, it meant that
she liked it so much.
I had written something.
She wanted a physical copy. Yeah.
It meant that what I had written had landed with her the way I wanted it to land. She had the experience of the book, and the book spoke to her in the way that I had intended. So to me, that was success.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're in the movies or even when I used to work on commercials, you could go in the back of the theater and see if people react to your sequence or if the ad agency or the client reacts to your sequence. You don't really get that as an author. So this was that experience for me. And I was just thrilled. I was thrilled that she enjoyed it. I was thrilled that it meant so much to her. And that just made my year.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great feeling. So what's your advice for other aspiring authors, especially maybe others who might be transitioning from a different field like you did?
My only advice is if you're a literary fiction author or a general fiction author and straddling that line, write what you want and write it the way you want. And I think too much advice that's out there is removing people's fingerprints. This whole idea of you can or cannot do this or do that. There are no rules. Art doesn't have rules if you're trying to make art. Now, if you're trying to make entertainment, and there's nothing wrong with entertainment. Look, I love thrillers. I grew up reading Alistair MacLean, Tom Clancy, Frederick Forsyth, now Mark Greaney, Jack Carr. I love that stuff. But it's a different animal, and it's a different set of parameters and protocols you have to adhere to in doing that. Those things don't exist in literary fiction, and they don't, or general fiction. All that matters is that you have a fantastic story and you tell it really well and uniquely. So don't shy away from what makes your book unique. Don't shy away from your fingerprint. Don't let people talk you out of, and that includes your editors. When I was looking for an editor for False Neutral, the first person I went to, I gave them a test page and I said, I do not want to be rewritten. What I'm looking for is somebody to find mistakes, find where I messed up, but I don't want to be rewritten. They sent me back the first page of my book, and it was Hemingway. It wasn't me. They had changed everything. And it didn't say what it said, and they didn't understand that it wasn't saying what it said because they thought that they had done what was de rigueur. And I'm going to say, I don't care about de rigueur. Tell your story. Tell it your way. Tell it with your fingerprint on it, with your aesthetic, with your taste. And that's what's going to make it wholly unique and wholly yours. And fight for that. Don't give that up.
That sounds like editing malpractice. When I'm not doing this, I'm also a developmental editor. And the first thing I tell the authors is, this is your book, your voice. I'm going to make suggestions as to how to enhance that voice and how to tell the story. But in the end, these are your words.
I think that's fantastic. And I was dealing with a copy editor, and the person was very nice, but I understood that I was speaking a foreign language. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I want the people out there. It's the things that you bring to it that nobody else has, the voice that you bring to it, the aesthetic that you bring to it, the way you tell the story in literary fiction, general fiction. That's what's going to make it. I'll liken it just a little bit to music for just a second. If you hear two notes off a guitar, man, there's a hell of a difference between B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, Andy Summers. The list goes on with those couple of notes. Who's playing? They might all be playing the same notes, but it's not the same. Fight for that. Fight for that identity. Fight for that fingerprint, and don't let that go, because that's what's going to make your work your own. And look, whether you sell a ton or you don't sell a ton, in the end, if it's what you intended and it exists in the form that you intended, that's a major win. Most people don't cross that finish line, and you'll be happy. Whereas if somebody changes it all and it doesn't resemble anything of what you want, you might make a fortune, but you're not going to be very happy.
Exactly. And I like the guitar analogy. You can definitely tell the difference between The Edge and Eddie Van Halen, or name that guitarist, and you can name it in just the first couple of notes. And same thing for writers too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you'll see it too. There are writers in television, and you can see when they're imitating other writers, or they're writing all the characters the same way, regardless of what the show is. It has the same cadence, it has the same pitch, it has the same thing. I'm not going to name names, but that's not very edifying for me. I prefer the uniqueness of the way people speak, or the dialogue, or the way the story is told. And the person I always use is Francis Ford Coppola. There's a huge difference between The Godfather and Apocalypse Now. And there's a huge difference between Apocalypse Now and Rumble Fish, or Tucker, a Man and His Machine, and even The Rainmaker. It doesn't really matter whether they're the movies you love or the movies that aren't your favorites. Everyone is unique. Everyone is different. He doesn't repeat himself ever, and he always swings for the fences.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Joshua. I appreciate you taking us on a journey from your childhood to cinematography to literary fiction. Your novels are False Neutral and Clear Cuts. And we'll have links to your site and everything in the blog post that will go with this podcast. Thank you so much, Joshua. I appreciate your time.
And thank you, Howard. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it, and it was a great time.
Wonderful. Bye. You've been listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. I'm Howard Lovey, Content and Communications Manager at the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com. This podcast stream is proudly sponsored by BookVault. Sell high-quality print-on-demand books directly to readers worldwide and earn maximum royalties selling directly. automate fulfillment, and create stunning special editions with BookVault Bespoke. Visit bookvault.app today for an instant quote. If you are a member of Ally and would like to be considered for the show, please write to me at howard@allianceindependentauthors.org and tell me what inspires you and how you can inspire other authors. As always, find more author advice, tips, and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.